Welcome to Leading with Empathy and Allyship. Uh, Hello to Toki. Thank you for bonjour, and thank you for introducing yourself. This is a live event and podcast series. I'm Melinda Briana Epler, the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst and the host of this series. We go deep and get real in the series. We build empathy and we explore tangible, actionable steps that we can all take to be better allies and better advocates for each other. So, and hello, Starlet in New York. Lisa, hello in San Francisco, working in digital healthcare. Awesome. Hey, I'm MJ Mary Jean from Mill Valley. Awesome. Good to see you again. So today we are talking with Andrea G. Tatum, Senior Director of Corporate Equity Engagement at Catalyst, Inc., about the emotional tax and the role of the inclusive leader. So hello, Andrea. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. Excited to have you and really have a deep discussion about this. So we'll dive into what the emotional tax is in just a moment. Just a few logistics for our live audience. As on screen, we have an ASL interpreter, Sophie, today. Our interpreters are sponsored by Interpreter Now, which is a deaf-owned company we're always proud to partner with. They're amazing. This is also being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So if you want to turn on captioning, go down to the bottom of your screen, hit close caption, and you can adjust the settings there as well. Thanks to our team, Renzo, Sally, Antonia, and Juliet, who are doing lots of things behind the scenes to make this all happen. They are also monitoring the chat. So, as I said earlier, there's a code of conduct you can find at tcin.co/COC, but just be kind and inclusive, and please do engage. It helps us. It helps us know what your aha moments are, what you're learning, and what you're thinking during our conversation. And then lastly, if you have questions for us, we will definitely leave time for questions at the end. So just use the Q&A function so we can find it easily. That's down at the bottom of your screen as well. Hello, Leva. Hello, Lore, Portland, Oregon. Nice to see you. Working on the Marco Polo app. Awesome.
Big fan of the Marco Polo app.
Awesome. All right. So, Andrea, can you tell us about your story? Just how did you end up doing what you're doing now at Catalyst?
Sure. So I currently reside in the Bay Area, but I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. And I got my start kind of thinking about all things diversity and inclusion when I began working in the nonprofit theater section. I was working as a marketer and really found that I didn't see myself included in a lot of what we were doing. As you can imagine, the arts are very elitist, and I was young and I was a Black woman coming into a really new space. And I just saw so much opportunity to think about how we marketed to different audiences, to start bringing them in. And I was so lucky that I had leadership that was open-minded to having those conversations around driving diversity, not just from who was in the audience, but also what did our marketing look like and what was actually on the stage. So those conversations were something that I was really doing early in my career. Fast forward, moved to the Bay Area, worked for the San Francisco Symphony for a little while, same kind of thing, really always looking at how do we bring in more diverse audiences, and eventually decided if I'm going to live in the Bay Area, how do I get into tech? And I pivoted and took all the skills that I had as a marketer, became a certified project manager, and began doing events and really looking at products and how do you market products. And off the side of my desk was doing a lot of diversity and inclusion work for a company called Tableau based in Seattle. And I really loved the focus on data, and I loved the work that I was getting to do around inclusion especially, and eventually ended up in a full-time position where I got to really focus on driving diversity within the organization, driving inclusion within the organization. But I felt like I was only doing it for this one company. And I was actually a supporter of Catalyst, or a nonprofit organization that's been in existence since 1962. And I loved the research that they had. It was so interesting to me to think about how to change behaviors through real data. And I was really intrigued by that. And a position came open, and I have the opportunity to work across several different organizations throughout the Bay Area and the entire Western region, helping them to drive their DEI efforts forward.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know that one of the things you're passionate about, and one of the things we decided to talk about in this episode is the emotional tax. Could you break that down for us? I know Catalyst has done some research on the emotional tax. Can you first just, what do you mean by an emotional tax?
Yeah, so we started doing research in this area back in like 2016. And really what it is it's this experience that people of color have when it's kind of the combination of feeling different from your peers at work because of your gender and your race and your ethnicity. And it's this feeling of constantly kind of having to be on guard, concerned that you're going to face bias in the workplace, the experience that you're up against stereotypes in the workplace. But what really makes emotional tax so unique is that it's not limited to just the workplace. As people of color, this is our experience day in and day out, everywhere we go. We don't have the luxury of being able to, put aside our skin and say, well, today I'm not a woman of color, I'm not a Black woman, and so we really looked at the experience that people of color are having. And so we looked at it both in Canada and in the United States. And it was really interesting to see the shared experiences across all of these groups, that they were really, the impact could even be, things like their health and their well-being and sleeplessness, and people saying that they perhaps would want to leave their jobs. So it's just a lot of different, it's this combined experience that's really kind of happening to people of color.
Yeah. Can you talk about can you share some examples, maybe some examples in your own life? How's it shown up for you?
Yeah, well, one of the really interesting things about having to be on guard is that you're kind of having to constantly process, should I change what can I change about myself to be more acceptable so that I don't have to be concerned about facing bias, or so that I'm not concerned about having to face stereotypes. And so it's really interesting.
Covering a piece of your identity, code switching, being somebody different at home versus at work. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's exhausting. It is such an exhausting experience. And so, for me, I feel very fortunate that early in my career, I absolutely tried to fit into these molds of who I thought I needed to be. I straightened my hair because I didn't want to be judged if I had my natural curly afro or my locks like I have now. But it's so interesting because I still, I'm a part of several different Black women in tech organizations and things of that nature. And I still see young women asking, can I go to an interview with my hair natural? And the fact that we have this whole Crown Act where we're having to have permission to show up as ourselves. And so, having to kind of experience that, having to feel like that I need to tone myself down. I tell people, I'm me, I'm animated, I'm a little bit loud, and I'm a straight shooter. I tell you exactly what I think. But to constantly process, how are they going to take that? How's someone going to think about what I'm saying, versus just being able to give my honest opinion, and not have that fear of what people are thinking of me, is something that I would definitely say is a part of that.
Yeah. And it seems like it's the intersectional piece of it makes a difference too, because I feel that to a certain degree as a white woman as well, constantly kind of monitoring how I'm showing up and monitoring what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. And then on top of that, being a Black woman or being an Indigenous woman or Latinx woman or all of the above.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's that really unique experience that, like you said, with that intersectional lens as people of color, we're walking into spaces that aren't always created for us.
Mhm.
And when you see those systems of oppression and you're having to kind of navigate inside of them, it really is truly a unique experience. I mean, I talk about this one example that back when I was really young, I used to have to call people to get magazine rates, like how much is an ad going to cost in this magazine. And I was calling this one person who the company had used for several years and they had a relationship with. And one day he just asked me, he was like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I get asked that question because I do have a Southern twang, and I just kind of assume that's what he was getting at. And um, as the conversation went on, I realized he thought I was a white woman because of he just thought I was a white woman. And he asked me, when I told him I was from Nashville, he said, "Oh, you're like me, down there with the purest of the pure." It's a very
Wow.
shocking experience in the workplace to have someone say something so bold to you. And at that age, I think I didn't know how to fully bring myself to address it. I
Mhm.
didn't really know how to have my manager address it. I didn't really know what to do. I mentioned it to my manager, but I don't think I understood the levity of what was happening. And I let it go. And it still really sits with me to this day. But like there's this desire that I wish I would have spoken up. I wish someone else would have spoken up. I wish
Mhm.
that we would have made change in the organization and said, well, maybe that's not a company that we need to work with. But if you can imagine going forward, I never corrected him. I never met him in person. And I just kind of let him believe that for the rest of the time that we worked together. It's a very draining, emotional kind of experience that you go through, knowing like if I met this person, would he accept me for who I am? And just to know that that's not a unique experience that I've had. Like people of color deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
It's really a lot to have to endure and navigate on top of saying, well, let me show up to work and put on a smile, be productive, and go and deliver what I'm here to actually do.
Yeah, yeah, and that brings up another point that, the workplace is extended, right? It's not just the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, but it's also clients, it's also vendors, it's also the people that we work with, and that adds another layer, and on top of um, that emotional tax outside of work entirely. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So how does it affect how people show up in the workplace, or our work and our productivity?
Yeah, yeah. As I was kind of saying, one of the parts of emotional tax that we definitely know is that it impacts sleep. And
Mhm.
I've looked at some additional research from the Sleep Foundation. And really, if you look at a lack of sleep, there's a correlation to productivity. And for me, it's just like, yeah, of course, if I'm mentally exhausted, it's going to be a lot harder for me to just focus on the work that I need to do. And so it has an impact. For me personally, I talk a lot about my mental health and the impact that this has on that. Having to constantly think about how am I showing up. I ruminate. I go back and I play everything that happens in every meeting in my head again. And it's very stressful to have to do that. And it's very physically um, it takes a lot out of me physically, and it takes a lot out of me emotionally and mentally. So when people are able to really thrive at work, just think about how much more a company gains because people don't have that fear. They don't have that sense of being on guard. It really opens up doors and allows people to work together in a much better fashion. And that's my experience, at least, is just knowing I can be the best version of myself when I believe that I'm in a place where I have psychological safety, to be able to take risks, to be authentic and be myself. It makes a huge impact.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of innovation, yeah, if people are able to take risks and not have have that fear mechanism happening in the background, that can make a big difference in how innovative you are as well as productive. And absolutely. So let's talk about, how in that moment that you shared earlier, how could someone have showed up for you as an ally? Let's start there, and then we can talk about like how allyship plays a role in inclusive leadership and what we can really do to create change in our organizations.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot of what ifs that could have
Right.
in that scenario. And I still, again, 10, 11 years later, still think about these kinds of things. But I do wonder, what if, my manager would have said, hey, how is this impacting you? What do you need from me to do in this situation? Or what can I, and like just had a listening, empathetic ear, right? Not just saying, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, and then go about business as usual, because that's really what happened, versus saying, what do you need from me in this moment? I can be here to listen if you just simply need to express your concern, or do you need us to action on this? And really being able to kind of come up together. Like, I wish I would have been able to say, like, no, like, here's kind of a solution. I'd be much more comfortable calling on a different magazine or a different newspaper and never having to speak to this person again.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been my ideal situation, because every time I just was preparing myself, like, okay, is this going to come up again? Am I going to have to tell him today that he's actually talking to a Black woman? And maybe we won't get the same rates. I don't know what the impact could have been. But like, being able to say, let me help you remove yourself from that situation so you don't have to worry about it. I more likely would have said, okay, I feel great in this space. I would have been more inclined to want to stay in that place and work there. But when you have all of these little things that add up over time, it really does have an impact on you. And you say, well, maybe this isn't the environment that I want to be in. Maybe this isn't the place where I want to work. And that's in your mind. So in an ideal world, having empathy for someone who's going through something that you've perhaps never experienced is really critical to helping them kind of figure out what needs to happen next.
Yeah, and Catalyst also just released a report on empathy, right? Can you share a bit about empathy and the role empathy plays in leadership?
Yeah,
Should play, could play, ideally
yeah.
plays. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was really good. Like the thing I love about working at Catalyst is I'm still learning. I think everybody has the opportunity to always be a learner. And I had never really thought about empathy as a skill. And that's something that they brought up and said, you're not either born with empathy or not. You can learn it. You can learn to have empathy as a leader, and it's really a superpower and has the ability to drive so much within the workplace. I mean, it can drive collaboration. It can help to reduce stress in the workplace. It just can really help to bring people together and increase morale and all of these really things. So there's so many benefits to being able to have empathy. And the report talks a little bit about some of those benefits and how it's a skill that ultimately can be cultivated, but you have to work at it. Just like anything else, right? I can't expect to lose weight if I eat what I want to eat and I don't go to the gym. That's not realistic. So I always think about empathy and inclusive leadership as skills that you actively have to work towards. It's a muscle that you can build over time.
Yeah, yeah. It's so much in there that I want to dive into, but I think the first is that it seems like there are two pieces of empathy and activated empathy, right? It's more the empathy itself. I believe empathy needs to be active, that I'm not a passive, like, you're not just having pity for somebody, but you're really learning and exploring, understanding their situation, understanding, and then taking action on it.
Absolutely.
And activating that empathy. And it seems like when we're talking about the emotional tax, and that emotional tax is a combination, I think, of navigating the workspace that was not necessarily created for you, right? That space, that white spaces when you're Black, for instance, and then also the stereotype threat that can play a role in that, as well as the covering and the code switching and all of that stuff, and maybe being feeling tokenized at the same time. There's a lot of weight to carry in that moment, and on top of that, so experiencing microaggressions or micro exclusions, and so I think there are two pieces, the two ways that empathy plays a role. One is in understanding what somebody is going through and taking action to solve that moment, and solve for that moment, and also mitigating the long-term, the short and long-term impacts. I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, in my experience as a manager, I often ask people when they come to me with something, and I say, in this moment, what would you like for me to do?
Mm.
Is it simply that you need to be heard? Because there are times I just need to be heard. I just need someone else to know what's going on with me in that moment. And I think, and I'm going to try to not get emotional, but I think about things that happen outside of the workplace. I think about right now as people of color, as Black people, especially, as we're seeing people be murdered in the streets who look like us. And then I have to come into work, and I've worked in spaces where I was the only Black person. And you try to figure out, like, well, how do I process this alone? I'm coming to work. You're asking me to still deliver on this project, but my heart is breaking. My heart is heavy. I'm sad. And when you have a really good manager who's got some level of self-awareness and can check in and say, what do you need? There's been times where all I needed was to express that I was upset and how it was going to impact me that day, that maybe I couldn't show up in the next meeting smiling and happy. I can't do that. I can't pretend. I couldn't put that face on. And I needed that empathy, them to understand the impact that it was happening. And there are some days that I need for them to say, actually, there's an action behind this. I need you to make space for me to be able to do this. I need you to help me inform other people of what's happening, or, help me get out of this situation. So I always ask people, what do you need? Do you need me to just listen? Do you need me to act? I can be a champion for you, but I also don't want to go and do something that someone doesn't want on their behalf, because sometimes it's just personal, and being able to have those personal relationships with managers. When I've been able to do that, it really creates this space where I want to be. Like, I'd rather work for a manager who I can have that trust with, and know I can be okay, and I'm safe here to express my thoughts and my feelings, even if they're not specific to work.
Yeah, and I think in situations like that, it is so important to create that psychological safety between you too, because there's so many people in an unsafe or perceiving that it's an unsafe or untrustworthy relationship that you have with your manager. You might want something, but say something else, right? That, I might not trust you to intervene. I might not trust you to be my champion, and where I really want that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this, we talk a little bit about, having a level of curiosity as a manager. Are you curious about the person? We're not just coming in, and we don't just, we're not robots. We're human beings with real experiences. And so as a manager who can lead inclusively, there's a level of curiosity that you do have to have about the people that you work with and be willing to engage them in a way that they're comfortable with and what makes them, feel like they are seen, that they're valued, that they're trusted. All of these things make a really big impact on feeling a sense of belonging and inclusion.
So could we talk a little bit more about the role of an inclusive leader in creating that culture of belonging, that culture of inclusion? What are some of the things that come up in the Catalyst work or just the work that you do?
Yeah, there's some really great models if you look on Catalyst's website around leading inward and leading outward, and there's these it's kind of these different models that we talk about, and I mentioned curiosity being one of them, but we also have like a lot of ways where we just say, talk to me. Those are really key to being an inclusive leader. And I think that it's so important for leaders to know that they have the ability to make a big impact, right? When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a corporate sense, it seems like such a big battle to have to conquer. But the reality is, one to one, a manager can make a big impact on someone's willingness to stay. So, right, when I think about numbers, everyone goes to numbers and diversity and like, oh, we need to hire more. No, you need the people who are already here to want to stay here.
Right.
Right? Like you want them to be a champion for your company. You want them to be there, and you want that will help you to reduce your kind of leaky pipeline, if you will. And so that is really what I think managers have to own and know, that they play such a big role in helping to create a culture within a company where people of color and women feel that safety to say, like, this is a place where I want to be. I can thrive here and I can be developed. And so as a leader, you need to be able to see the potential within the people that you work with. So like through getting to know them, through getting to understand what is it that they excel at, then you're really getting to say like, oh, okay, this person may really have some interest in this role. I can see them as a leader. Let me help to develop them. The goal is to get people to also move up inside of your organizations. And that's all on a people manager. And, you can really sponsor people who are, whether they're a part of your line of business or not, really creating opportunities for sponsorship, which is going beyond mentorship, can have a huge impact on a person of color. And again, you're creating opportunity for them to say, yeah, this is the place where I want to be. Like this is good. And that's great. That's what you want.
Yeah, let's for those that are listening that don't know the difference between mentoring and sponsoring, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think for mentorship, anybody can really be a mentor. You can have peer-to-peer mentors. You can have mentors who are above you. I also think that sometimes you can have mentors who are maybe at a level below you, because you can always learn from people. And that's really the relationship I see for mentorship. Whereas sponsorship is someone who is speaking your name when you're not in the room. How are you making sure that people know? And I've been lucky. I've had some really great sponsors in my career because I've advocated for myself. So whenever I wanted something, I always just kind of spoke up and said, this is a thing that I want. I'm interested in diversity. I'm interested in this. So that other people could speak up on my behalf because they knew I had the skills. That wasn't the question. But maybe other people who weren't seeing me in that capacity didn't know. They had no way of knowing that I might have those interests. So when, as a leader, especially if you're in some kind of an executive role, that you can take on speaking up on behalf of someone else and saying like, oh man, Melinda or Andrea, they they could actually be really great in this position. I've seen their leadership skills. I've seen their ability to bring people together and make an impact. I've seen what they can do as a marketer. I've seen what they can do, right? When you speak up on something, it makes people sit back and think, oh, well, maybe this promotion that's coming up, we shouldn't look outside of the organization. We should be looking at this person who you just said is a great leader who's already here. So that's really the impact that sponsorship can have.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody who is listening in and has questions, just put them in the Q&A. We'll start to dive into those in a few minutes. So one of the things that that I saw in the empathy research was the whole idea of building trust as a key component, and it echoes some of the work that we're doing around allyship, the research we're doing around allyship, and a key theme, a huge theme that is emerging that I wasn't really expecting is the trust and trustworthiness within allyship, that above all, people describe allies as being good allies, as being trustworthy and having that ability to trust them. And I think the same is come out in inclusive leadership work as well. And of course, that study will be coming out next year, our work on allyship. So we'll share more then. But can we talk a little bit about trust and how, how trust is formed, how trust is built, what that looks like when we're building empathy?
Yeah, I mean, to the point I made earlier, right? It really does. It requires work. You have to be able to really know that I can trust you with what I've got going on, with my career advancement, speaking on my behalf. I also want to be able to trust that you're not judging me for things. I need to be able to know, right? We talk a lot about bringing your authentic self to work. And being able to do that requires a level of trust that when I show up as me, that won't then turn around and be a problem. So I have to be able to know, because you can't say on a job description, for example, oh, we really want someone who challenges the status quo. We want someone who really speaks up. And then when I do challenge the status quo, or I do speak up when something doesn't feel right, then I get kind of pulled to the side later and go, hey, you shouldn't have spoke up. You shouldn't have said anything. That was this person. You can't speak up, or the way you said that. Like I need to trust that my voice matters. I need to be able to trust you with that, so that I really feel this sense of like, again, it's safety. It always comes back to that, and it has such a big impact that I feel engaged. And again, goes back to your intent to leave or to stay, and to be productive and to be innovative. All of these things, again, they play together so much.
Yeah, agreed. I think the other piece of trust is maybe that if I tell you something happened, that you'll act on it. That I can trust you to take action when I need you to take action, and whatever that looks like, and to learn if you don't know what that looks like, right? That piece of it too.
Yeah.
So how have allies played a role in your life?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Can you think of a couple of examples or ways that allies have really helped show up for you?
Yeah. Oh man, that's such a good question. I kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier, and having these experiences where maybe someone speaks up and says, I'll give an example. Again, I am very bold. I am very outspoken in meetings. I tend to have an opinion about everything. And I lead with that. I tell people, I joke about it, and it's fine. And I tell people, it's fine. You don't have to agree with everything, but I do want to share. But I've been in some workplaces where that just wasn't welcomed. And when I found that I had an ally, it was someone who could say, hey, Andrea, just so you know, when you left the room, that conversation didn't end. That actually continued, and your name may have come up again. And that allowed me to kind of then be able to go back and address the situation and say, hey, what was it about what I did? And you know, somebody else could have just let that conversation have happened in a vacuum. And I would have never known, and it would have just shown up on a performance review later. But someone really, they're taking concrete action and saying like, hey, I want you to know what's going on. I didn't feel like them having the conversation without you in the room was appropriate. So that's, you know, that's one example that I've seen. And, you know, I think allyship can show up in so many different ways. When I talk about having a manager, I had one manager who really saw that I was struggling. There were some days when there was a lot happening in the world outside of work, and I was struggling to show up. And they said, your energy is low. You don't seem like yourself. What can I do? What do you need, you know, from me? And I said, I need a minute. I need a break. And I would have never taken the day off. Like, you know, for me, it was like, come in, put your head down and do the job. But when someone shows up as an ally and says, what can I do to actually make this better for you? I actually took a moment and said, what do I need? What will make this better? And I needed to rest. I needed rest. I needed to heal from what was kind of going on. And that just made a big deal and a huge difference in my ability to come back and show up as the best version of me. So I think, you know, always just knowing that allyship's a verb. It's really got to be this concrete action that you do. It can have a huge ability to change someone's day, their year, their career trajectory, in all honesty. So it is, you know, I think allyship is a great entry point, but there's so much you can do, you know, especially as I think about what's going on in the world right now, to move beyond, to move towards advocacy. And that's, you know, really advocating on behalf of other people as well. But it takes understanding, it takes reading and asking questions and getting more knowledge about particular situations. So I always just kind of say, to be an ally, it's a constant thing. There's no like, yay, pat on my back, I did allyship today.
Right. Yeah. And you know, you brought up something I think is really important in the situation you just described, which is asking that, you know, I work with a lot of executives on allyship and helping them kind of build that empathy and allyship muscles, those empathy and allyship muscles. And they get very nervous when it comes to intervening and when it comes to treating the impact afterwards, right? Because there's two pieces of this, that you intervening in the moment, but also working as a manager, really working after the fact to go back and say, okay, so how did that impact you and how can I help? And so many people think that they have to have all the answers in that conversation, so they don't have them. They don't have those conversations. But really all you have to do is ask. You know, that can make a big impact in and of itself, because then it gives the person a moment to reflect and say, well, what do I need? And let you know.
I think the biggest thing with that is when you do ask, you have to be willing to act though.
Right.
It can't be an empty ask, because sometimes people are just like, okay, well, you know, I like, how are you doing? That's such a just kind of day-to-day question that you ask. But if you really want to know how I'm doing, it may require you to sit down and have a conversation, because if I just tell you I'm fine, that may not be the whole story. So in the same thing with, as a leader, you need to be willing to say, what's the whole story? How do I act on it? And sometimes the act part is hard, because what you may need to be able to do is dismantle an entire system that has been set up that's oppressing people, that's holding people back, that's keeping them from being able to succeed in their current situations. So you have to be able to say, you're telling me something that I may not have known, and I need to be able to figure out how, it's not even like fix it, but how do I make sure that the next person isn't experiencing it? How do I make sure that when I look at this system, the way it's set up, that it's not doing someone else harm as well? So there's always that part about really being ready to act when you ask a question like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Janine says, as an African-American, I asked the person that I'm in conversation with, how would you feel if the same situation happened to your daughter or your mother or your niece? Yeah, it's a way to kind of apply it to that person, internalize it a little bit more so they can tap into that empathy. Yeah. So Mary Jean asks a hard question that I get asked a lot. What's the best way to ask ignorant people to take action? Any thoughts there? How do you get people who don't know what they don't know? And we'll just be kind in that some people are stay ignorant because they want to stay ignorant. But I think I think that the people that we can really potentially impact are those that just don't know yet.
Yeah, no, it is hard. Full disclosure, that's not easy. There are some people, though, in certain situations, you need to meet them where they're at. You have to be able to acknowledge their experience and your experience really are different. And so, especially as a Black woman, like I think about race and I think about, intersectionality, and I think about all of these things way more than probably the average person does. And so if you have a colleague who this isn't their personal experience, it helps when you can build relationships. They do have to have some level of curiosity, but if you can engage them and build a relationship with them, meet them where they are, bring them along the journey. I find for me, storytelling is very impactful. When people can hear what your experience is, they're far more likely to, it hits them more real, versus when sometimes it's just something they saw on TV, something they read in the newspaper, something that it doesn't impact them, that's somebody else. But when I always just talk about my personal experiences and try to find ways to relate to them in the best way that I can. I have one story I'll tell that, I won't say that this person was ignorant, but they didn't know what they didn't know. And they asked some questions in a meeting, and I pulled them aside very kindly afterwards. And I just said, hey, you may not be aware of how this came across, but let me tell you about how I experienced it and how the person who you said something about may have experienced it as well. And it wasn't that I was trying to attack that person or anything like that. They didn't know, and they thought that they were just kind of saying something funny, but it wasn't. It was harmful and it was disrespectful. So I found that I was able to, pull them aside, have a conversation with them, try to relate to them on a personal level so that they could know that this was serious, and just try to kind of bring them into the conversation.
Awesome. I'm putting myself on mute because there's doing a lot of construction in the unit next door. There's people drilling in the wall. So if you all have other questions, we do have a little bit more time. So let us know if you have other questions or if you have other topics that you want us to discuss. Andrea, as we're kind of looking to the future, 2021, we're getting near the end of this year, which has been an incredible year in terms of an emotional attacks on so many people. And if somebody says they're doing well right now, you might want to ask them again, by the way, if you really want to know the answer. So as we kind of go into 2021, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of inclusive leadership, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, oh, great question. I'm looking forward to a path forward. I think that there's been this world in which we're divided, and I really would love to see our country come together more. I'd like to see coworkers and colleagues come together more. And I think it really requires getting people, again, that storytelling, having this sense of empathy, and getting people kind of moving in the same direction. I think that's really what I am hopeful for in the future, is that we can all start to see a path forward in this work that we're doing. Be able to see how to make real impactful change, especially on the experiences of people of color, Black people, Black men. My heart goes out to Black men, especially when I think about their experiences day to day in the workplace and outside of the workplace. How can we come together and work together? And that's really what I am hopeful for. I'm hopeful that we get past kind of some of the conversations that are light, and be okay having hard conversations. Like, I think we have to be able to tackle what's really going on, because that's the only way that we can kind of move forward. I think about, how do you break things? That's always kind of been my philosophy, is like, if it's not working, break it, rebuild the foundation. And I think that we've got a lot of foundation that we've got to rebuild, because it's been crumbled. And as we build a stronger foundation together, we really have an opportunity to build on top of that a much brighter future. And that is what I am hopeful for. I don't think that all of a sudden 2021 is just going to be a switch and make everything that happened in 2020 go away. But I think it's an opportunity to reset, rebuild, and move forward.
Well, yeah, well said, well said. I would say that for a lot of people, having hard conversations and breaking things is not something that comes easy or natural. Or, my husband and I were talking the other night that as a white woman growing up in my family, I was taught to not break things, to not not talk about race, not talk about politics, not talk about a lot of these things. Do you have any suggestions for how we start to do that? How do we go about that?
Yeah, I think we all were. I think, I think we
Yeah.
all had this sense of, the idea of color blindness, and
Right.
that's something that we were taught that was a good thing. But the reality is, you need to see color. You need to see people for who they are, the wholeness of who they are, in order to really be able to say, like, I see you. I see you. I acknowledge you. That is so needed. That's when real connections happen. And that can help you, again, that's that path forward, is like, I'm a Black woman. I have a husband. I have general anxiety disorder, and I talk about that a lot. And I need people to know who I am, how all of those parts of the puzzle impact me day to day. I want to know, if you're a mom, how does that impact you day to day? I want to know your story. And I think when people can create those real connections, you have the opportunity to have conversations, because you'll start to find similarities inside of that. Because although we have different experiences, there are a lot of things that we share. And when you can find those commonalities, it's like, okay, it makes you, it humanizes people. If you don't, I know some people who are like, I've never really had to work with people of color. I've never worked with Latinas. I've never worked with Black women before. You've always kind of worked in these silos. But once you get to know someone, you're like, oh, she's a mom. She likes to dance. She goes to work out. You get to know this person. I think it's really cool. I think that's I think that's an awesome opportunity to create and bridge divides.
Yeah. So even in the remote workplace, we need to figure out ways to allow people to make those connections, to tell their stories to each other, to learn from each other, to have those moments that might happen in the kitchen or the water cooler near the water cooler that we have to figure out how to do in the remote workplace right now.
Yes. Oh, it's so hard. It is.
Yeah.
It's hard. I think as leaders, if you can find ways to create that space for people to be able to connect and to, engage with one another beyond just what's due right now, what project are we trying to accomplish? Mm-hmm. I think people will feel more of a sense of belonging. But I have to say this. You also have to be okay with people saying, I'm bringing the version of myself that I want to bring. We're inside of people's homes right now. And there's some people who are like, I may not be comfortable being on camera all the time. You've got to be, that goes back to that empathy thing. There may be a reason why I don't want you to see my background. I'm very privileged in that I work from home and I have a home office. But there are some people who are like, I'm working from my kitchen counter, right? And so there's got to be this sense of what version are you okay with bringing to work, and managers being okay with that. That's how you show. You can't just demand everybody's got to be on camera all the time. You've got to be able to say, what do you need? What's right for you right now? And then help to create those connections.
Yeah, and I think also open up the fact that not everybody has to have a perfect life behind their head when they're on camera, right? That exactly. It's okay to have kids climbing on you. It's okay to have people walking past you. And I think modeling that as a leader can be really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have one question I think we can get to. It's not an easy question, from Lamar. A few people in our company who are part of the Black employees group, the ERG, I guess, have asked to form a separate group just for allies so they can ask uncomfortable questions they want to ask and also feel safe. They feel like they can't speak up in our Black employees group since they are not Black. I feel this is counterproductive. How do I talk to them about this?
Yeah, no, that's really a good one. I think saying it out loud. I think really saying like this is a safe space where we can have courageous conversations. We're not going to I think, I use the word safe space with a lot of caution, because it's not about making people comfortable. People need to be okay with being uncomfortable, but they can have real, authentic conversations. So you can invite them in and say, hey, if you really want to be a part of the conversation, if you want to be a part of change, we're inviting you to be a part of this group where we have these real conversations, where you're going to hear, this is the most authentic place to be able to hear it. And acknowledge the fact that, if you're not a part of the group, there may be times that you get things wrong. And so if you do, you have to be able to acknowledge if you've caused harm, and say, sorry, that wasn't, it's not about your intent, it's about the impact that you had. So you need to be able to figure out, how do you acknowledge the impact that you had, but still be in it. That doesn't mean you run away. That's how you move forward. I go back to the gym analogy. Going to the gym doesn't feel great. Like building muscle, there's a little bit of pain inside of it. And so you've got to really be able to be okay building those muscles and moving through that, and trying to not cause harm to the people who are a part of the Black ERG, but being there to learn so that they can become advocates as well. That's that's my opinion on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, ERGs are a safe space for people to be who they are, right? And so as an ally, you have to be really careful in navigating that space. And perhaps the ERG could take specific moments, like once a month or something, where they really just focus on the questions allies have and really exploring those questions, so that you're able to kind of do both and have the safe spaces to ask questions, but it also a programmatic space to ask questions with some ground rules, and to really, yeah, be able to do both with that ERG. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always so dependent on the culture of the company and the climate. So yeah, you do have to navigate it and kind of figure out what's best for that group and how to move forward. So I think that's a great question. But I think coming together and having the conversation as a group and saying we don't want you all to feel like you have to do this outside. We want you all to feel like we can do this together. Is really is monumental in being able to say, like, everybody has a seat at this table.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I just realized we're at time. Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate all the work you do and what you brought to this conversation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for having me. I'm so glad we could do this.
Yeah, me too, me too. And thanks to our live audience here for your questions and your engagement. Really appreciate you all being here each week. So join us each week for Leading with Empathy and Allyship. You can check out what's coming up at changecatalyst.co/allyship series. And please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel, and give us a review, a thumbs up when you have a moment, and of course, share it. Please share it so that we continue to grow this knowledge and this work and the muscle of change. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.